Welcome back to Caracast, the podcast from Carasoft, the trusted government IT solutions provider. Subscribe to get the latest technology updates in the public sector. I'm Corey Baumgartner, your host from the Carasoft production team. On behalf of Mimecast, we would like to welcome you to today's podcast, focused around cybersecurity insurance strategy. Neil Clausen, Regional CISO at Mimecast, and Jonathan Woodall, Senior Sales Engineer at Mimecast, will discuss key requirements and tools of how public sector customers have utilized Mimecast to strengthen their cyber insurance strategy.
All right, so let's talk a little bit briefly about Mimecast. So why Mimecast? Mimecast is a great company, been around for about 20 years. We've been in the security space for a very long time. And the great thing about Mimecast is we learn as we grow. We're up to about 40,000 customers now, a lot of end users protected. We see a lot of email, but the great thing is too, is as we've grown as an organization, understanding the threat landscape that is email, we'll dive into this a little bit more in a moment, and everything that kind of surrounds that, we've learned about how to evolve the company into not just focusing exactly on email, but maybe some of these other threat vectors that folks are going to attack against, whether that is, well, how do we exfiltrate data from folks? How do we do this against people? And we can go on and look at how that really works. So ultimately, we have this great thing, this work surface that we call, well, our people, those individuals that have a great amount of knowledge that do all this great work for us, and how do they communicate, and how do we protect the data which those people are actually generating? Well, ultimately, email has become a risk for us that gives us the capability to, well, there's a great avenue into all these different things to attack these things, to attack people, to come out and be in the middle of communication, to do all these things. So malicious actors are going to come after and say, well, we can manipulate, we can coerce, and all these other bad words via email. So there's a lot of ways that threat actors have figured out, there's URLs that I can attack. That's kind of table stakes that we block against. There's all these different threat attachments and all that. But realistically, the easiest way to get information is just to get somebody to do something for you. Why circumvent the controls which already exist when I can just get people to do things for me? And that's, well, 91% of all attacks into an organization come through email. 94% of successful attacks are through human error. What does that really result in? Well, whenever people make mistakes, there's monetary loss, business disruption, reputational damage, all these different things. There's a measurement that's against these, and depending on your size of organization, there's a number that you can actually put against what that really means. And so what we're going to talk about today a little bit is, well, how Mimecast kind of fits into this, and then some of the other things that you can even do for yourselves to try to avoid some of these threats, some of these issues that may play your organization. So from a Mimecast perspective, we are really looking at how do we protect people, that's sometimes from themselves, protecting your communication in the more traditional ways of looking at it at, well, can I block these URLs, these bad attachments, this spam, all this other stuff, and then just generally protecting your data itself from exfiltration or otherwise. Neil is going to actually take a moment to talk about what this challenge looks like from that perspective.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and as I mentioned, I'm a practitioner, and I have gotten a ton of value out of webinars like these when I walk away with actionable, strategic, tactical ideas, a better understanding of the threat landscape. So that's my goal over the next 20 minutes before I pan it back to John, is to really kind of give the overview as well as some actionable advice. So I think this is a challenge that all the folks on the call face, right, is that we're trying to protect those revenue generating systems from those negative impacts. They're pretty prevalent. We're trying to do that with consistent, effective controls, that defense in depth strategy, effective responses, and doing that against threats that really never sleep with a staff that unfortunately has to, right? I guess, except perhaps if you're in Vegas, that doesn't count. But right, this is a real challenge that we are all facing as operations experts. And the likelihood is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, or hopefully not when again something's going to happen. We'll talk about ransomware as a service. It's really lowered the barrier to entry, but that is effectively what's happened, is that the old days where it was just one person in their basement, as John and I were mentioning, we're doing the nefarious stuff. Now there's a whole underground ecosystem. So ransomware operators are doing those initial compromises. It's called an initial access broker. They're landing, they're expanding, they're moving laterally within your environment. They're assessing how much data you have, the value of that data, and then reselling that downstream. So they're kind of effectively middlemen now. It's somebody else, those ransomware operators, A, B, and C, are taking the risk of actually engaging with you, but it's also vetted, and there's profit sharing. There's either the buying in directly. So this ecosystem is real, and it's making the threat even more prevalent. And the number of ransomware variants is greatly increasing. There's 10,000 variants now, and the lifetime life cycle of those is pretty quick. So it's a very fast and highly targeted threat. So that impact is obviously huge. We're talking about $4 million is the average breach all in once you pay ransomware. The ransomware ask is going up. A lot of people now are deciding not to pay because they have the controls in place. We'll talk more about that. But ultimately, this is what it's going to look like if you get hit. You're going to have an email that shows up probably at the most inopportune time. And as I mentioned earlier about the ransomware as a service, they have support levels, right? They've got a platinum level of support, which gives you access to 24/7, if you're the bad guy, 24/7 chat and all that kind of support to make sure you as a ransomware operator are able to achieve your nefarious outcomes. So this is real. And ultimately, as security practitioners, we say we're the brakes that allow the business to go fast. Cyber risk is really financial risk, is really business risk. And when it comes to that kind of risk, you can really accept it. You can't really avoid it because, as John mentioned, you have to have presence on the internet, collaboration tools, and using email is the way business gets done. You can reduce that risk, and we're going to talk about some good strategies for that here, but you can also transfer that risk. And transferring it comes down to just good old insurance. And if you folks have ever bought car insurance policy or health insurance, it's essentially the same thing. It's going to, the policy is going to cover things like the forensic investigations, crisis management, the incident response, notification if you have to tell your customers or credit protection services, right? So the policy and the coverage is going to vary. They do not cover things like intellectual property theft, lost reputation, or lost future profits. So you can't necessarily transfer all of this risk away, which is why you need to do all those things appropriately. But it is one form of risk management, just like, again, a car insurance policy is protecting you from your car gets totaled. You're going to pay a premium for that. Those premiums continually increase. We'll talk more about that. And then how much you need to pay, it's called self-insured, is increasing significantly as well. So the insurance firms are like casinos, like Las Vegas. They both hate losing money. And what they're going to try to do is understand where to place those good bets. And so because they've been having to pay out, because the casino has been having to pay out over and over again because so many people got hit with ransomware over the past few years, these premiums are increasing significantly. I've given this talk much times over the past few months, and out of the 80 chief security officers I spoke to, only one of them was able to keep their premium at zero, and everyone else saw an increase. I'm happy to say that Mimecast, through all the things we'll talk about, were able to reduce their premiums by 16%, which was hundreds of thousands of dollars, and because we were able to demonstrate a strong, secure program. So it is doable, and as things settle down, hopefully you can implement these as well. But they're also decreasing how much they cover. You need to go to multiple insurance firms to get multiple levels of insurance, and there's even talk now about not covering like a nation-state attack. So if Russia or China or someone attacked you, then maybe that's not going to be covered in your policy. And they're absolutely looking more behind the curtain to see, do you have the right people, process, and technology? Are you doing the right things in order to be credit worthy or bet worthy? So again, this is the concept we'll talk about here, but really that strategy, how do we get effective in this, is being quantitative, not qualitative, because that's what the insurance firms are all based on, actuarial tables, right? It's where their history comes from, and they're looking at the math behind those bets to determine whether or not you're a good bet. So because the attacks are getting more complex and more aggressive and more impactful, because there's an incredibly large surface area that you need to quantify how well you're covering that, because the budgets are limited, as we know, right, and the time of your staff is limited, we really need to quantify that I have the capabilities and the capacity, right? It's about both. And so just doing the 1 to 5 maturity model, I'm okay, isn't necessarily good enough. So here's what some of the actionable advice I'd have is, some of these are free, right? So this is a big thing for me, is it's not Mimecast specific. We use these methodologies in-house, but you can use them as well. Cyber Defense Matrix was something that came from an RSA talk a number of years ago. This is the URL to it. It's a long paper, but I think it really boils down to this. So it's taking the standard NIST cybersecurity framework and going through all the tools that you currently have that map to your end user devices, your servers. Just go through an inventory with your IT and security folks. What tools do we have that identify users? My DHCP logs, my wireless logs. What tools in our stack help us protect them? And this will be a way that you can identify gaps, drive change. At one company I was at, we had nothing for databases, so that drove some initiatives to say, yeah, we have some sensitive data there. We don't know how much and where, but we know it's there. So let's implement some programs to identify and then protect and then detect around that. So just a good methodology. It's something you can do and then refer to and continue to build on and understand as you're looking at new products, where they're going to map, what gaps they're going to fill, and do I have something that's currently in that space. So then I would say the CIS can controls assessment tool. This is, again, free. This is exactly what the insurance firms are going to be asking you for now. When you go for insurance, they're going to have you fill this out and be able to quantify against, now it's 18 different control areas where you have capabilities and where you have gaps. And this is just a sample graph that kind of shows you like, yes, we've got all these controls implemented, or this is the good, better, best of where it is. So again, highly recommend you do this. I'd also suggest if you, as you move up the model, using the ransomware business impact analysis. This tells you, do I know what systems are generating the most revenue for my company? Do I know how much it would cost me if those systems went offline? And kind of starting to do some ranges around that. So after that, I would say starting to be able to be quantitative about measuring how much MITRE attack coverage your tools give you. So another free tool is the spreadsheet out on GitHub, and you can map for your seam detection rules or just your capabilities. Yeah, I can detect these types of attacks against my environment. And again, why? Because this is what as John and I was saying before, this is what the bad guys are going to be using against you. So if I can understand and quantify and be mindful and have my finger on the pulse of my environment and know that I'll be able to, if somebody does get an initial access, we call those events of interest, right? It's not a compromise yet. Events of interest that lead to then an investigation, and then, okay, yeah, maybe somebody did get on my environment, but I held them to specific choke points. I tripped them up with different deception techniques, and that resulted in me being able to detect them and not have a breach. So understanding your TTP coverage is huge. This is another way of doing that, a little bit more mature with a JSON format. But ultimately, Mimecast plays in this space because we give you great visibility into the initial parts of the attack, phishing attacks, and lateral movement as things are moving around your environment. So again, I would say baseline your current stack against which TTPs that stack gives you coverage for. So now I'd say after you kind of quantify and understand your risk profile, and again, you have to do that because that's what the insurance firms are doing. So when you go to negotiation, you're better prepared. You're able to talk about what key controls you have. And these are the 12 controls that Marsh, which is one insurance firm, is going to look for. And so Mimecast obviously plays significantly here. You absolutely have to have some type of email filtering because, as John said, 91% of your attacks are coming through email. You think of your attack surface like a funnel. At the top of that funnel is email. And the better you close that funnel, the fewer things you'll have that hit your endpoints, your network, and your servers and your users. So that's one area. And then obviously training those users so they're mindful of what attacks they could be subjected to with both regular periodic training, phishing simulation. We've got the ability to take an actual incoming fish that's a real fish and defang it and still send it to the user as an awareness and training exercise, right? So it's about that multifaceted approach. Yeah, and then so backups, because obviously that's going to impact your business operations. Mimecast has continuity and archiving, so that even if Office 365 goes down or your internal systems go down as part of a ransomware event, you'll be able to be protected. Systems hardening, John's going to talk about DMARC, but for me, that's about protecting your brand, and we've got other tools that protect your brand as well. So ultimately, then being able to orchestrate this with your ecosystem, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So shore up those key controls. Also monitor your internet credit score. This is companies like BitSight and Security Scorecard. The insurance companies are using these scores as the way to assess your cyber hygiene. Are they doing the right thing and not just at the end of the year heroics, but throughout the course of the year? Do they understand their IP space? Do they understand what's exposed is internet facing? Are they doing the good hygiene there? So really make sure that you're working with your network teams, because quite often these credit score companies will have incorrectly assigned blocks. They'll say this is part of your network space and it really isn't, and that's going to be dropping your score. I'd also highly recommend you segment your guest wireless traffic out a different IP address or out a different network entirely, because infected machines on your guest network can significantly drop your score. So do those right things and keep your finger on at least one pulse. If you are a Mimecast customer, I believe you get 5 free security scorecard companies to monitor in your portfolio, so do that. And then I say for patching on vulnerability exposure, it's not just about every CVSS score that gets patched, but doing the most critical vulnerabilities, the ones that are being actively exploited in the wild, on your most critical systems, again, those internet-facing ones or your data-generating ones, in the most critical time frame. So that should be like one day. So working with your IT team, and I know there's a lot of friction there. I've run vulnerability teams before. It's a lot of friction. So you can prioritize it. There's a tool called the EPSS, the Exploit Prediction Scoring System, another free tool. You can overlay that against your Nessus or Tenable or Q, your Qualys output, and be able to start prioritizing based on exploitability, not just vulnerability. So then I'd say optimizing that control ecosystem, right? Mimecast has fantastic API capabilities, not just for threat sharing, but for configuration. This helps you with your team staffing, with repeatability, as well as all of our ecosystem and all of their best of breed tools. We've got over 200 out of the box click integrations, CrowdStrike being one. So if you're a CrowdStrike customer, all the threat intelligence that we're pulling can cross-pollinate over there and vice versa. So really, really, really helpful. And it tells a good story to your leadership, helps you have a more secure network, helps you tell a great story to your insurance firms because you can show that you're actively and quantitatively reducing risk and using that mesh concept of best of breed tools. And then obviously incident response, that is an incident is a surprise, but your response shouldn't be. So I highly recommend you do that pre-planning. I am a huge fan of tabletop exercises, which are basically like the old Dungeons and Dragons going back, right? They're sitting around a table with not only your technical staff, but also your PR team, your legal, your finance, your executive leadership, and run through that scenario of what's going to happen. This is called train like you fight and fight like you train. So making sure that, again, not if, but when something really bad happens, that all the key stakeholders know who the internal stakeholders are, who's going to be talking to the press, who's going to be escalating, that kind of thing. And again, another free tool here. This is from the UK government, the NCSC. It's called Exercise in a Box. For free, you can sign up and you can do these exercises as well. And again, getting those stakeholders on board so that you're minimizing your risk. This is another thing the insurance firms will look at to say, well, when was the last time you actually trained? Well, we never did. Well, then how do you know you're going to be effective? And that's going to increase your likelihood of lost revenue, increase your likelihood of missteps. That's going to give the attackers more opportunity to maybe come back and hit you again. So again, really, really important. And this is something I'm very passionate about and happy to talk to you folks more about as well. So ultimately, you've seen some, so now putting your best forward, right? So being able to quantify your risk, understanding the people, process, and technologies, that three-legged stool, telling a good story. I usually say you don't need a metrics program, you need a goals program. Once you clarify your goals, you can start asking the questions on whether or not you're meeting the goals. That is when your metrics come into play, right? So don't just collect stats just because. Talk about how those stats are answering that, yes, we have a strong and secure program that's worthy of an effective and affordable insurance policy. So really, this is a team sport, right? This is all about us together versus the bad guys, not us versus each other or the insurance firms. So hopefully you've heard some good stories here that talk about how to understand your risk profile and adopt this methodology, right? Just do this as a lather, rinse, repeat. Always just be continually understanding, do I have unmitigated risk? If so, is that risk within my company's risk appetite? How can I reduce my attack surface further and further and further and drive that down? You'll notice in my talk, I did a good and a better. I actually have a best slide as well, but I felt like that was maybe a little bit too much information. I'm happy to kind of dive in if you're at that higher levels of maturity and to kind of talk about really places where you can put the icing on the cake. But hopefully you can understand that, maximizing your controls and then telling a good story around it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my friend John.
All right. Thank you, Neil. So from the perspective of a couple of different things, I'm going to talk through, as Neil mentioned earlier, a little bit about a technology called DMARC, and it's a kind of a standard. There's a lot of great RFCs that define about how this functionality actually should exist and how it works and how we've rolled it in. But ultimately, it really matters about how you're securing your organization. So as I briefly mentioned earlier, there's a number of different things that we can do from the traditional, let's look at email security and block the things that we have to block. We have to block malicious URLs and attachments and spam and impersonation. And Mimecast does a great way of doing this, but realistically, if you see up at the top, Mimecast is a platform. Why does that matter? Well, years ago, when I was still in actual IT, before I kind of declined into this side of things, there was a great statistic that Gartner had put out at the time that normal IT organization has something like 200 different tools that they're trying to manage. And as Neil had broken out earlier into all those different places where we plug in, well, one, note that Mimecast as a platform is servicing all of these different tools kind of in green all together in one place for you. So that really consolidates that effort there. But then you've made all these other investments into other tools as well. CrowdStrike, great example, Palo Alto, Splunk, whoever it is, all those other ones that were on Neil's slide. How do we make our tools work together? Let's reduce the technical debt that it takes to get to an answer of what's bad. And realistically, that's what we're trying to work for. The whole adage of it's not a matter of if you're going to be attacked, but when. Well, let's make sure that we can respond quickly or block things before they've ever happened. And I'll talk about timeliness more in a moment. We're going to briefly talk about email security for a moment, and then a little bit about DMARC. But again, Mimecast does a lot of other things about protecting you. I like to say that We do everything in the realm of email security. That's what we're really good at. When it comes to other things, well, we rely on the folks that we directly partner with and we have great relationships with as well. We're not going to do a great deep dive on these things, but let's talk about what Mimecast can do. And that's going to be around, well, here's our DMARC friend right here. What does that really mean? Some of you may know, you may not know. One thing I'll tell you this is if you do know a little bit about DMARC, I've actually got a tool that I built. I'm a big fan of Python and wrote a tool that went out and I know all the Division I universities in the United States. There's 351 of them. I put them all into my little tool. It goes up, grabs everyone's DMARC record, came back and I figured out that 250 of those were protected by DMARC. Well, interesting stat was 80% of those 250 had done nothing with their record. They were not actually protected when they thought they were. There's a great problem with this in that don't buy a tool that you're not going to use. Let's make sure that anything that we do have in place, that we're not just checking a box, that we're truly using it in a meaningful way. So how does this play into, well, reputation? Who's sending on my behalf? So I'm not only talking about reputation from the perspective of, am I trying to protect myself, but am I trying to protect my reputation as it is perceived by the rest of the world? Am I trying to stay off some naughty list to make sure that people can still receive my emails? Not a great place to be if folks can't see you. All these other things, spam, that's kind of table stakes. There's a lot about how that really works, but let's go on just a little bit further into how we do things with attachments. And again, this is more static checks of let's look at, well, commercial AV engines. Mimecast actually technically uses 3 different engines. Well, why would we do something like that when most vendors actually use one? Interesting statistic. How many times have you seen that our efficacy, our being whoever your vendor is 99 point something percent? Well, let's qualify that, as Neil said earlier, let's qualify that against a timeline. Does that 99.9% equal now or 4 hours from now? Because it turns out it actually matters. Did you know that my users click on everything immediately when they get it? And by the way, as a former IT administrator, I am now the world's worst IT end user because I literally click on everything, especially working for a security company. Mimecast has figured out ways to not only prevent threats, but prevent them as quickly as possible. Timeliness matters. That's what helps from preventing that threat from exfiltrating through your organization, not only inbound from your organization, but maybe attacks which may originate from in your organization, or even those attacks that may work laterally east-west as well. A lot of great tools that we have in place for this, but also fun to know that we have auto remediation engines. We can also be influenced by, hey, here's CrowdStrike again. Let's learn some threat intelligence from Palo Alto or some other great vendor. And it's going to influence the way that we do things for any other threat which may come in. We'll block it, but we'll also look back and see what's been delivered to you, and let's make sure that we remediate that as necessary. A lot of great things that exist here. Everything you see here is just part of the Mimecast solution. Last thing I'll actually point out is just from a URL perspective, what's really different in Mimecast rewrites URLs. I know that's not necessarily a norm or a standard across how we do things, but what is interesting is how Mimecast does this is each and every time you click on a URL that has been sent to you via the Mimecast or through Mimecast, each and every time now or 5 years from now, we check that URL to make sure it's safe. You can look over LinkedIn, who I used to work for. It was mentioned on an earlier slide. Everyone gets attacked. Everyone's front page. It's a great thing for an attacker to kind of show their credentials about how great they are, as they can use that. As Neil said, this is as a service now. People will come out. You can go out on some fun websites, find these attackers to go do things for you. You can build a campaign and they'll go find these ways to do this. They use that. So each and every time that you click on a URL, Mimecast will check that to make sure that your users are safe. There's a lot that goes into what that check actually means, whether, well, this is something that's different. It's a use of artificial intelligence to check that. Is there some place that you're going that looks similar to another website? Maybe a Microsoft. Maybe there's places you shouldn't be going. And what does that realistically look like? And Mimecast will block that for you at any point in time. On-premise, off-premise, cell phone, doesn't matter. Lots of great protections outside of what your traditional web security is a great thing to have, and you absolutely should have it as a perimeter layer of security. Mimecast is just going to tie that together and give you additional protection outside of your perimeter. So when it comes to these threat actors and them building a campaign against you, it's not as easy as it used to be where I can, well, we have a lot of great tools, as you've seen here, to block these normal threats, but the easiest thing for, well, as an attacker to do is, I try to not say me because I'm not allowed to do those things anymore, but as an attacker, what would you do? And realistically, it's first thing is let's do some reconnaissance. Let's learn about who our subject is that we're trying to exfiltrate some data from, get some money from. How much do they have? How much will they normally spend? What does their budget look like? Well, public entities, interesting thing is they publish everything. I know exactly how much money you have. I know exactly what this budget is. So as I'm writing a story, reading the news about any city which has had money taken from them, and it's very closely matched to what their published budget is because attackers know what that budget looked like. Enough to go do. How does Mimecast really work? So on the static side of checks that we're doing, we're going to look for all these normal things. However, static's great. It's going to block the normal things. I like to say special rules for special people. We can do all these things. That's fine. But then there's the dynamic aspect of it where we really need to learn on things like machine learning. We can't make so many different policies to affect every use case. So Mimecast has built a hybrid model that's really looking at every aspect of how do we protect people? And sometimes, again, it's protecting users from themselves. One of the ways that we're able to do that is by machine learning. We see a lot of different emails, as I mentioned earlier, about 1.3 billion emails a day, billions of data points based on sender, receiver, and all these other things. And we tie them together with machine learning to know what is common for how your users operate. And when something's different, let's just let you know about it. Well, what does that really mean? As you know, some of you will probably have external banners on your email. External banners are fantastic. It's a little bit like the boy who cried wolf of email security, in that you see it over and over and over, and we become fatigued to what that really means. So Mimecast has a slightly different mechanism that's, well, we're going to pass along contextually relevant information when it's relevant. We're not going to overstimulate the person who's receiving emails. We're on a fun iPhone here. You can tell from the obvious and a little bit ugly notch at the top here, but regardless of what endpoint you're on, Mimecast can insert contextual intelligence that the end user can act upon, choose to act upon as necessary. We can see there's a couple of data points here. Well, this domain was recently created. First time they've emailed your company. What else could I learn from this? Well, maybe you've never replied to this person. No one in your org has either. Someone was interjected into your email chain. You've had a conversation going back and forth. Something's new. So not from a security perspective, but maybe you just need to know that something's different. Oh, what about my name's spelled Jon? You accidentally put an H in there when you email me. We'll notify you about that as well and say, you may be making a mistake here about who you're trying to send some data to. Lots of great things that we can automatically do. And it is entirely dynamic, entirely self-sustaining, so that you as an administrator, as an operator, as an IT leader are not having to worry about the care and feeding of this ecosystem. It is sustaining itself. Other fun things that we can do. Well, attackers are going to learn about your organization through fun things like trackers. 85% of the world's email has trackers. That's not a Mimecast stat. We just know that because, well, a lot of different organizations measure this. My wife's business, I even set her up to be able to utilize trackers so that she can see when people open invoices. Great information from a marketing perspective or understanding how your customers are operating. But from an attack perspective, I can learn about, well, where you're at, what type of device you're on, who you care about. When I ask you, maybe I'm trying to coerce you into doing something or manipulate you into forwarding something to other people in your org to build out this org chart of who you care about. This is one of the ways that you're going to be able to do it. Suffice to say, how does that really work? Well, Mimecast has a way to block these things. They're called trackers. Think white pixel, white background. All that information that we're grabbing each and every time that loads, Mimecast becomes a CDN for trackers without all the baggage. We'll go ahead and strip those sorts of things out. It's a great mechanism to prevent people from even starting to build that campaign against you. So think of implementing this automatic security intelligence gathering systems along with people getting threat intelligence. This is that layer 8, if you're an OSI model fan, the layer 8 behind the keyboard that we're trying to protect against. This is a great way to do that. Cool thing too is Mimecast actually has 10 different patents on this exact technology to make this work. It's something that's distinct to us. Let's actually look at some of this over here as far as how Mimecast actually does it. As I said earlier, Mimecast is a platform. What that realistically means is, as I do go log in, if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, we actually have one login to rule them all. And I can see exactly everything that I can do within Mimecast, whether it's the general administration console. Here's our friend DMark. We do all these other things as well. But as I go log in, I have a Tennessee education, so I will not type out my multi-factor authentication 6-digit code in front of you. So I've already done that. I've logged in. I log in once, and anything and everything that I need to do is from one login. It just makes it easier to administer. Now, flip back a little bit, each and everything that you do within the Mimecast console is also tied together. Well, why does that matter? Well, our email gateway automatically protects your archive. I've got something that's been in archive for 10 years. Is it safe to hydrate back into a user's mailbox? Good to know. Are we protecting something from some old threat that, guess what, we no longer patch against? We're not patching everything from the beginning of time. That's just not how it works. Furthermore, if you don't know this, there's a lot of old signatures which roll out. There's millions of signatures which have been built to look for specific hashes that are no longer relevant. That, well, there's some old attacks which can be still utilized as those signatures roll off. A lot of great things that we can do within the system here. I can see great information about how it works. It's a very responsive system. Just so you can see here, I can come in here and look for little things like, what's, if I could type correctly, let's look for the disposition of some email or some emails over some amount of time. Cool thing about Mimecast is one of the things that we're really great at is actually search. You can go read us about us in Gartner. One of the things that they tout about us is our search capability. Pull back 81 emails out of about 1 million. Doesn't matter if it's 10 million or 100 million. But I can come back and see exactly the disposition of exactly what's happened. So from an administrative perspective, if I do need to go find something about what happened to an email, I don't care where it exists. Now, interestingly enough, is Mimecast has this capability to not only protect you from Outlook or from, Office 365 up in the cloud, Exchange on-prem, Google, maybe you have a combination of all three. We can apply a singular policy or the policy itself umbrella across all these different providers simultaneously. And that's actually what I'm searching right now is 365 with Google. You really can't tell because it doesn't matter to us. We are protecting email. We're protecting your data. We are protecting your people. There's a lot of cool things that we can do. Again, this is extremely responsive, extremely granular. It's very easy to use. We can dive into a deeper demonstration if you ever want to, just please let us know. However, I do want to jump over into something that's a little more interesting, and that's going to be to talk about DMARC itself. So DMARC, some of you may or may not know, I avoided DMARC, I'll be totally honest, like the plague for a very long time, because a lot of the things that I learned about DMARC were just marketing fluff. You hear all these things, and I'm going to break it down real quick about what it really is. Standard Policy Framework, SPF. SPF is a record that lives in DNS. Not a big scary thing. What it is realistically, what IP addresses can send on my behalf? Is it your organization? Is it Microsoft? Is it a constant contact that you use for mailing services? Good to know. DKIM, what's that? That is the signature that I put on something. Now it's a cryptographic RSA signature that exists, but just think of it as a signature. Does the signature in my letter actually match correctly whenever you receive this email? Now it's a combination of these two technologies that get married together that we call DMARC. And we're going to understand, is this appropriately sent from the right IP? And does your signature match? Fun thing about signatures, I like to tell people is we're a little bit better than, if you ever look on the back of your credit card, it says it must be signed. I don't know where, I was a waiter. I don't know where waiters go to school to learn how to identify signatures, but I never got to go do that. But we're very good at it, at understanding exactly how this technology works. So realistically, how does this actually come into operational play? So there's all these things that we normally look for. So think inbound security of spam defense virus. We've talked about this, business email compromise. And then there's DMARC. So for inbound purposes, as you're sending or receiving emails into your organization, DMARC's a great thing because you're going to understand, is this truly the person who is sending you this email? If not, throw it away. Now, how do we know to throw that away? That's actually influenced by the sender itself. So Mimecast sends you an email. Neil actually set up DMARC for us. Talk about more later, but just know that if you receive an email from Mimecast, you can be assured that it came from Mimecast. Did you know SMTP has no defense mechanism to prevent spoofing? I can actually show you, I do it on all my demos. I can spoof any organization that I so choose if they do not have a DMARC record. It is not difficult to do. I've been doing it since I was 9 years old. So that's one of those great ways to protect your organization from people spoofing your supply chain, people you do business with. Are they trying to send you some sort of invoice that you need to pay? Let's just block that altogether from the get-go and make sure that we're taking care of that. However, on the outbound side of things, it gets a little more interesting. So why do I care about protecting me as an organization outbound? And it comes down to a little bit about my brand, my reputation, all these things that play into, well, eventually prices that you're going to pay on the insurance side of things really relate to how well you've done as far as being a good steward of the rest of the world. Plus, it really matters, again, about making sure that, Well, what about just fun functional things like email deliverability? If your DMARC is not set up or is incorrectly set up, guess where your email goes from most organizations? It goes into spam. It goes in their junk folder. They're never going to receive that. So if you're a school organization or a county or otherwise, or a state entity, whenever you're sending emails out to the people that you're trying to reach, is your email actually getting to their inbox? DMARC is one of the primary mechanisms that is utilized to determine whether email should be delivered or not to the appropriate inbox or junk mail folder. So as far as how this works operationally, what's really happening under the hood is each and every time you send an email, if I send an email somewhere around the world, the person that received it, the person that actually processed it creates a report. It's in not a great human readable language that gets sent back to you. And we understand, this is something that we need to act upon. However, when you start to get hundreds or thousands of these reports each and every day, there is no possible way for a human to understand these reports and records to do something that's really an easy task. It's just monotonous, and it's not something that we can overcome. So as far as what DMARC is really built for is, well, you understand what you're sending as, whether that's you sending as yourself, maybe Russia sending as you. I actually have someone on the call, one of my friends they have our DMARC product, and I believe that they had some folks sending on their behalf from Antarctica. That was a first for me. However, I can almost guarantee you with absolute certainty that Russia and China are sending on your behalf of your organization. It is totally normal for each and every time that we do an assessment for customers to understand who's sending email on their behalf. But ultimately, we want to understand who should be sending on your behalf, whether that is your organization, and we want to block all the bad stuff. So we define that, that's fine. But then there's also fun shadow IT that pops up. Let's get a handle on that to make sure people are not operating outside of what the mechanism is, the policy that we have in place. Let's understand, let's put some policy in place to say that, wow, these organizations cannot send on our behalf. And after we do that, we roll back over and we kind of review over and over. And that is this compliance aspect of what DMARC actually looks like. Now, ultimately, when we're looking through to become DMARC compliant, you build out a very simple DMARC record. Our tool actually does it for you. And effectively what it does is it says, I want to monitor only to understand who sent on my behalf. That's great. Quarantine means that, well, if I send an email to your organization, I'm actually instructing you to quarantine that message if it did not come from me. And then the last aspect of this is where we really want to end up is just flat out reject it. If it's not for me, just reject those emails. They're bad. No reason for you to retain those. And again, where are you getting that instruction? It's based on me and what I defined in my DMARC record. So let's look at what that actually looks like from the Mimecast side of the house. So we're going to look at the DMARC Analyzer tool. What this effectively is taking all the senders of email around the world that use your domain, right or wrong, and we are going to consolidate this data down into a nice little spot. So, well, it's human readable now. 25 million emails that we've analyzed, and we've understood exactly who is compliant on the SPF, whose IP has been sending on our behalf. Quite a few that have been impersonating us. And then the DKIM side, that signature side, is it matching? And we realistically want to get these as close to 100% as we can. But what that really looks like from your perspective is, as I start to go through and analyze folks that have failed on sending emails which are not DMARC compliant, they are not matching that IP address. Well, here's a lot from China and a lot of other things here. Now, the thing is, there's still a lot of organizations. Here's Amazon, lots of people utilizing their services to send emails that shouldn't be going on. We can see all the bad things. We can even see all the good things and where we're lacking and where we should be fixing these things, where we should be updating our SPF record, adding an IP to it, really easy to do. But realistically, what it comes down to is, I don't know what I don't know. I have my well-known truth of, well, I know that we send from Microsoft or Google, that's fine. But do I send from this source? So I don't really know, but I can come in, and what we're really trying to do here is make a workflow. Well, you know what? I don't know what this one is. So let's just mark it as under investigation. And then I can actually come in and look at later on. I can say, is this something that I intended to send from? As I'm working through, I can make a workflow of getting through this process. This may seem a bit tedious, and I'm not going to lie, it can be. However, it's something that you work through, and as you get down to a more finite amount of results, it's great. Just know that Mimecast can actually do all this for you. You don't have to do it yourself. We have a team of professionals that will do this service for you. so that you don't have to do it. We'll do it for a year. We'll get it whittled down to almost nothing, so that realistically what we're going to look for here as a customer is, well, when something's different, when something doesn't meet your compliance requirements, we'll just notify you. We'll do all the heavy lifting for you. After a year, we'll drop off, give you the education that you need, and let you manage this on a day-to-day ongoing perspective. But you really don't need to know exactly, you don't have to do all the monotonous work that leads up to this.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to our guests, Neil Clausen and Jonathan Woodall. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Caracast, and be sure to listen to our other discussions. If you'd like more information on how Mimecast can assist your organization, please visit www.carasoft.com/Mimecast or email us at mimecast@carasoft.com. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.